Somewhere over Portland, Oregon, January 5th, 2024, a Boeing 737 MAX 9 is climbing through 16,000 feet, carrying 177 passengers. Then a door-sized hole rips open in the side of the aircraft. The sky rushes in. Oxygen masks drop. A child's shirt is sucked toward the opening. Bags scatter across the cabin. Parents grab their children. People near the hole press back in sheer terror. The plane lands safely. Miraculously, no one dies. But 4 bolts are missing. 4 bolts that were supposed to hold the door plug in place. 4 bolts that should have been installed at the Boeing factory in Renton, Washington. 4 bolts that someone removed and never put back. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. This is the same company that once built the plane that defeated Nazi Germany. The same company that put astronauts on a Saturn V rocket bound for the moon. The same company that gave the world the 747 and made air travel available to ordinary human beings for the first time in history. The same company whose engineers used to say, "If it isn't Boeing, I'm not going." How does a company like that end up shipping a plane missing 4 bolts? That is the story we are about to tell. And it didn't happen overnight. It begins in 1903. The same year the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk, a young man named William Boeing dropped out of Yale and headed to the Pacific Northwest to make his fortune in timber. He was methodical, exacting, and obsessed with quality. Those traits made him rich in lumber. They would make him legendary in the sky. In 1910, Boeing attended a flying exhibition in Los Angeles. The moment he watched a machine defy gravity, something changed in him permanently. He wanted to learn everything. He wanted to build better. 7 years later, he did exactly that. On July 15th, 1916, in a converted boatyard on the shores of Lake Union in Seattle, William Boeing incorporated the Pacific Aero Products Company. The first aircraft they built was a seaplane called the Bluebill, a wooden float plane assembled by boatmakers who had never seen an airplane up close. Boeing himself was so unhappy with the materials they were using, he complained constantly that corners were being cut. Even then, even at the very beginning, that perfectionism was not incidental. It was the founding culture, the DNA. When World War I broke out, the United States Navy needed seaplanes fast. Boeing delivered 50 of them. The contract kept the company alive. After the war ended, Boeing pivoted to airmail. In 1919, William Boeing personally flew the first international airmail route from Vancouver to Seattle, carrying 60 letters in a seaplane over open water in the rain. He was not sending subordinates to prove things. He was doing it himself. Through the 1920s, Boeing grew steadily, driven by military contracts and mail routes. But the real transformation, the one that would cement Boeing as something more than a manufacturer, came in the 1930s, when the company began to dream at a completely different scale. The Boeing 247 in 1933 was the first modern airliner. All metal, retractable landing gear, 2 engines. It could fly coast to coast with just 1 stop. Airlines lined up for it. Then came the B-17 Flying Fortress, first flown in 1935. A behemoth bomber that would become the backbone of the Allied air campaign in World War II. But there was a storm coming for William Boeing personally. In 1934, the U.S. government accused him of monopolistic practices. Antitrust legislation forced his empire to be broken apart. He sold his stake in the Boeing Airplane Company, walked away from the industry he had built, and spent the rest of his life breeding thoroughbred horses. He never ran Boeing again. He would live until 1956, long enough to see the company he founded become the dominant force in global aviation. But he stepped away from the thing he built, and in doing so, left it to other men to define. That detail matters more than it seems. With William Boeing gone, the company entered its most remarkable era, not because the founder left, but because the engineers took over. And what engineers they were. During World War II, Boeing produced the B-17 and the B-29 Super Fortress, the planes that carried the war directly to the enemy's doorstep. The B-29 is the aircraft that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. No other manufacturer could have built it. It was the most complex machine ever assembled in human history at that point. The engineers called it their greatest achievement and their greatest burden simultaneously. After the war, Boeing made a decision that would define the next 40 years. While competitors like Douglas and Lockheed focused on propeller-driven planes, Boeing bet the entire company on jets. CEO Bill Allen, a lawyer by training but an engineer by instinct, understood something his rivals did not. The jet age was not a trend. It was civilization's next leap. In 1954, Boeing secretly built a prototype jet called the Dash 80. When Allen unveiled it publicly in 1955, he asked the test pilot to roll the massive plane at an air show over Lake Washington. The crowd went silent. The plane rolled perfectly. An airliner had just done what only fighter jets were supposed to do. That moment produced the Boeing 707, the plane that effectively created modern commercial aviation. From that one bet, one vision, one insistence on doing something no one else would dare, the entire structure of global air travel was born. But the 707 was not the peak. The peak came in 1966, when Allen called in a manufacturing executive named Mal Stamper and told him Boeing was going to build the largest commercial aircraft the world had ever seen. They had one order from Pan Am and a rough sketch of an idea. What they produced was the 747, the jumbo jet. To build it, Boeing constructed an entirely new factory in Everett, Washington, the largest building on Earth by volume, covering a space equivalent to 40 football fields. They hired 50,000 workers. They built their own city. Employees called it the Incredibles factory because no one outside of Boeing thought it was possible to build what Boeing was building. When the 747 entered commercial service in 1970, it did something almost no piece of technology in history has done. It democratized a form of travel. Before the 747, transatlantic flights were for the wealthy. After the 747, they were for everyone. Ticket prices collapsed. The world shrank. The global middle class started moving. Boeing had not just built a plane. It had changed the architecture of human civilization. And through all of it, the culture remained consistent. Engineers ran the company. Engineers sat on the board. Engineers made the final decisions. The joke inside Boeing was that the finance people existed to fund what the engineers had already decided to build. You had a vision first. You found the money second. That was Boeing. That was the identity. For decades, it was unquestioned. Until 1997. To understand what happened in 1997, you first need to understand McDonnell Douglas. McDonnell Douglas was Boeing's only real American competitor. By the mid-1990s, it was dying. Its last great aircraft was the DC-9, designed in the 1960s. The MD-11 had underperformed. Airlines were defecting to Airbus. The company was running out of road, and it knew it. Boeing absorbed McDonnell Douglas in a $13.3 billion deal in August 1997. On paper, it looked like a clean victory. Boeing eliminated its last domestic rival and absorbed a powerful defense portfolio. American aerospace was now consolidated under one name. But inside the walls of the merged company, something far more consequential was happening. The McDonnell Douglas culture, obsessively focused on financial metrics, cost-cutting, and short-term shareholder value, had not been absorbed by Boeing. Boeing had been absorbed by it. Harry Stone Cipher, McDonnell Douglas's former chief executive officer, became Boeing's president. He was blunt, direct, and completely uninterested in the old identity. He told employees to stop behaving like a family and start behaving like a business. He is on record saying, "When people say I changed the culture of Boeing, that was the intent, so that it's run like a business rather than a great engineering firm." He said, "The quiet part loud." He meant every word. The engineers who had run the company for decades watched in disbelief. A company culture that had been decades in the making was being dismantled in real time. One senior Boeing veteran described it this way: Harry outsmarted Phil, and his gang bought Boeing with Boeing's money. We were all just disgusted. In 2001, Boeing moved its headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. This is not a symbolic detail. It is a defining one. The CEO and the board of directors physically separated themselves from the factories, from the production lines, from the engineers who built the planes, from the culture that had made Boeing Boeing. The last aircraft untouched by this cultural transformation was the Boeing 777, delivered in 1995. It is still celebrated today as one of the most perfectly engineered commercial aircraft ever built, on schedule, on budget, loved by every airline that flew it. After 1997, a different philosophy took over. Instead of building new clean-sheet aircraft to compete with Airbus's new models, Boeing increasingly chose to upgrade old platforms, cut costs, outsource production, deliver financial returns to shareholders, and maximize the stock price. What looked like disciplined business strategy was something more insidious. It was the slow abandonment of the thing that had made Boeing irreplaceable. For a while, the strategy worked financially. The stock went up. Shareholders were happy. Analysts praised Boeing's efficiency. Wall Street loved what it was seeing. Then came the 737 MAX. By 2011, Airbus had developed a new narrow-body aircraft, the A320neo, with new fuel-efficient engines. Airlines began switching. American Airlines, which had been exclusively Boeing for decades, placed an order for 260 Airbus planes. Boeing panicked. Instead of building an entirely new aircraft to compete, which would have taken a decade and cost billions, Boeing chose to update the 737, a design that was already 50 years old. They would bolt new, larger engines onto the old airframe, get it certified quickly, avoid expensive pilot retraining by telling regulators the plane was essentially unchanged. The larger engines changed the aircraft's aerodynamics. The plane tended to pitch upward under certain conditions. To compensate, Boeing engineers developed a software system called MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, which would automatically push the nose down when sensors detected the problem. Here is what makes this a crime and not just a mistake. Boeing knew MCAS could cause problems as early as 2012. A test pilot experienced what was described as a catastrophic event in a simulator that year. The conclusion was stark. Even a Boeing test pilot might not be able to recover the aircraft if MCAS activated incorrectly. Boeing buried it. They removed MCAS from the pilot training manuals entirely to avoid triggering an FAA requirement for expensive simulator retraining. They told regulators the system was so minor, it did not need to be disclosed. Internal communications showed employees joking about regulators being confused by Boeing, communications that would later be introduced as evidence in court. The 737 MAX entered commercial service in 2017. Everything appeared fine. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 took off from Jakarta. 12 minutes later, 189 people were dead. MCAS had activated based on a single faulty sensor and pushed the plane into the ocean while the crew fought desperately to understand what was happening. A system they had never been told existed was killing them. Boeing's initial response was to blame the pilots. 4 months and 12 days later, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 took off from Addis Ababa. 6 minutes into the flight, 157 more people were dead. The exact same cause, the exact same system, the exact same horror. Aviation regulators across the world grounded every 737 MAX on Earth, 387 aircraft, 8,600 weekly flights across 59 airlines. The FAA was one of the last to act. The chief executive officer at the time, Dennis Muilenburg, appeared before Congress. He was asked whether the 737 MAX was safe. He said yes. He later admitted he might have made different decisions if he had known more. 346 people were already dead. Boeing paid $2.5 billion in a settlement. Boeing admitted to deceiving the FAA. Families of the victims called the fine a slap on the wrist, and they pursued the Department of Justice for years, demanding criminal accountability. One whistleblower, John Barnett, spent years raising safety concerns about Boeing's manufacturing processes. He testified about planes being assembled with missing parts, about a culture where raising safety issues was met with retaliation, where the pressure to deliver was so intense that corners were cut as a matter of routine. In March 2024, while in the middle of giving legal testimony in his whistleblower case, Barnett was found dead. He was 62. A month later, another Boeing whistleblower, Joshua Dean, who had raised alarms about supplier Spirit Aerosystems, died suddenly at 45. 2 whistleblowers, dead, within weeks of each other. Boeing said it takes all safety concerns seriously. On January 5, 2024, 5 years after the MAX crashes, 5 days into the new year, and 2 days before Boeing's deferred prosecution agreement with the Department of Justice was set to expire, the door plug blew out on Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 over Portland. Blowout. The investigation found 4 bolts missing. The FAA conducted a 6-week audit of Boeing's production facilities. Boeing failed 33 of 89 audits. The FAA capped 737 MAX production at 38 aircraft per month and announced it would not lift the cap until Boeing demonstrated it could build aircraft consistently and safely. Boeing's chief executive officer, David Calhoun, announced he would step down. The board was restructured. A criminal investigation was opened. Boeing agreed to plead guilty to fraud. A federal judge rejected the plea deal. Negotiations continued into 2025. In August 2024, Boeing brought in Kelly Ortberg, an industry veteran who had spent his career at Rockwell Collins before retirement. He was not a financial executive. He was an engineer. In a detail that speaks volumes, he moved his home near Boeing's manufacturing hub so he could walk the factory floor. He restructured the executive team to prioritize engineering and quality over financial targets. He began measuring employee bonuses on safety metrics instead of financial ones. Quality and safety now determine a large share of bonuses. Under the previous structure, 75% was tied to financial performance. That single reversal tells you everything about how far the company had drifted and what it took to pull it back. By 2025, there were signs of life. Revenue in Boeing's commercial division climbed significantly. Deliveries increased. The backlog of orders, more than 6,300 aircraft, valued at $500 billion, confirmed that airlines still needed Boeing, regardless of what the company had put them through. Airbus simply could not build planes fast enough to replace Boeing entirely. But the debt was staggering. Over $53 billion. The company had burned through $14.3 billion in cash in 2024 alone. Boeing's credit rating sat just above junk status. The road back was not months, it was years. As of February 2026, Ortberg described the turnaround as underway but unfinished, perhaps more work ahead than behind. Boeing outsold Airbus in 2025 for the first time since 2018. The stock had risen over 40% from its lowest point. Analysts were cautiously optimistic. The worst-case scenario, bankruptcy, had been avoided. But 346 people remained dead. Their families fought for years simply to have someone say the word accountability. Some are still fighting, and somewhere in a Renton factory, engineers are building the next generation of aircraft, watched more carefully now than they have been in 20 years. Here is what Boeing's story actually is. It is not a story about a plane that crashed. It is a story about what happens when an organization built around a craft, around the obsessive, almost irrational pursuit of engineering excellence, is gradually, systematically, taken over by a different set of values. Values that are not wrong in themselves. Efficiency, profitability, shareholder returns. But values that are catastrophically wrong when they are placed above the original purpose of the organization. William Boeing was a perfectionist who complained about the quality of the wood in his very first aircraft. He was building something he believed in before anyone told him there was money in it. The company that shipped a plane missing 4 bolts had become something he would not recognize. The question Boeing's story leaves us with is not really about Boeing at all. It is about every institution, every company, every system that starts with a mission and slowly trades it away, one financial quarter at a time, for metrics that look like health, but feel like hollowing out. How do you know when a company has crossed that line? When is it too late to reverse it? And more uncomfortably, how many other Boeings are out there right now? Planes we are all flying in, bridges we are crossing, food we are eating, medicines we are taking, where the same quiet trade has already been made and we simply haven't found out yet. Boeing found out at 16,000 feet. If this story unsettled you, good. It should. Because the most dangerous thing you can do right now is close this video, move on, and assume Boeing is the exception. It isn't. It is the template. The only people who ever catch these things before they become disasters are the ones paying attention. So, if you are someone who pays attention, subscribe. Next, we are pulling back the curtain on another institution that started with a mission and quietly traded it away, one you interact with every single day without realizing what it has become. And if this video made you think of someone, a colleague or a friend, Someone who works in finance or in engineering or in any industry where this quiet trade is happening right now. Send it to them, not to alarm them. The conversation that follows might be the most important one they have this year. I would like to hear your thought. Which company do you think is the next Boeing? Which institution is already past the point of no return, and the rest of us just don't know it yet? Tell me below. The next script might be the answer you give.